Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This video is sort of like a part 2 of Forgotten and Lost Ages of Man. Check that one out first to get the full idea. Ancient humans. Humans have been around for almost 100,000 years in our present form. Yet civilization and agriculture is barely 5,000 years old. Just what were we doing before that? There have been a few discoveries of about 10,000-year-old artifacts like pick-related. But surely humans must have been doing something more than hunting or gathering for all that time. Is there a reason why there's so few artifacts from that long ago? Were they all destroyed, or are they being hidden from us?
The reality is, we were just not a lot of people. Even with 8 billion people, there's still vast regions of land that probably have never been set foot on by a human. Imagine the whole world having only 100,000 people because of diseases, danger from animals, etc. Most people back then, for thousands of years, long simply didn't have a lot of time to do anything significant.
It's honestly probably just too old to find anything. Most of the things humans would be making would all be natural materials back then, so would have rotted away to nothing. That and the fact there were just so few people.
I think I read the bottleneck was like 20 to 40,000 humans spread out all over. To me that's terrifying. No humans anywhere else. Weird.
The total human population was very low back in the day. According to RA, by the end of the second cycle, it was no more than 350,000 less than 1 million people on the planet. It may have been more earlier, but I'm not sure. Anyway, by the time we get to the destruction of Atlantis, things are picking up population-wise. But most artifacts from this time period are deep in the ocean floor. We still recovered artifacts from 12,000 plus years ago, but they are mostly hidden from the public. I wouldn't expect any crazy high-tech building materials or anything, though. From what I recall, the only high-tech civ at the time was Atlantis, and even then they were more of a crystal and spiritual tech society. They could do all kinds of stuff that we cannot for the moment, and most likely had a few small UFOs, but they did not have modern computers, vehicles, plastics, TikTok, etc., at least in this timeline. I'm sure more artifacts will pop up soon and be shown to the public. Nearly everything we used materially prior to pottery was organic. Leather, furs, skin, wood, fibers, dyes, and so on all decay rapidly in most conditions. To say nothing of underwater conditions, given the rise in sea levels over human prehistory. The vast majority of Paleolithic artifacts are stone or bone, hence the name. What did they do? A lot, probably. I don't think it's unrealistic to assume they danced, sang, made music, laughed, told stories, looked at the stars, were curious, played games, etc. Things which would be almost entirely lost without writing or pictographs. That's why the cave area is such a special deal, as was the advent of pottery, where we get the Venus figurines and other small sculptures. The wooden sculpture you posted is really 1 in a million or billion. Now consider that with what other Anon said, our population was low. The total output of material culture was likely lower and lower the further back you go. So not only do you have few things survive, but the amount of things which can be preserved decreases. And of course, things are less likely to persist the older they are.
Throw your average smartphone into a river. In a few seconds it's dead. In a few minutes the components are unrecoverable. In a few weeks the plastics are visibly degraded. What will remain in a year, 10 years? It's going to get covered by layers of sediment. Will the beings living 10,000 years from now even recognize the strange glassy shard of a thing they found on the edge of a river? Sure, a moving water environment will erode things the fastest, but it doesn't change the overall idea. Things break down over time, and unless it's carefully prepared and preserved, then anything will be lost to the erosion of time. Maybe not an object's form, but its function for sure. Now think about the fact that Earth has catastrophic events, from the slow cycle of the ice ages to sudden meteoric or comet impacts. Not to mention that the current understanding of what happened in our past has been screwed with so much that trying to make any kind of timeline is nigh impossible or end up sounding like some schizo.
This There's barely anything left of some cities that are only a few thousand years old. Now imagine something 10 times older and add an glaciation period to scour the Earth clean. You're not going to find anything.
Right. Folks may not know, but dinosaur fossils are very much a freak occurrence. They show up in places that are barely touched by time and weather. The majority of dinosaur remains have been crunched and crushed into oil. What we are able to locate are remains that haven't been subjected to hundreds of millions of years of flattening, stuff that is barely buried beneath the sand in crazy, weird places where wind blows enough to keep the layers of time from accumulating. A human civilization perfectly mimicking what we have today would likely be completely undetectable in less than 1 million years.
Humans, 100,000 years. Not at all. The only thing that matters is it's been 6,000 years since the last flood, many prior, but it's moot. The history of our enslavement is older, but again, none of it matters. Only the time between the floods and pole shift matter.
I actually do think the deluge really happened, and not just because I'm a Christian either. Every culture has a myth of a worldwide flood. It just feels too widespread to merely be convergent cultural evolution, like how every culture has dragons and giants and vampires. All those things, they just crop up too much in too many different places for there not to be something to them. The flood is similar.
I can get behind the idea of a massive cataclysmic flood that disrupted and destroyed various cultures all over the world, and the story was passed down, but I cannot with the idea of a global flood that covered all land for like 2 months.
End of the Ice Age caused the flooding.
Reminds me of an old joke. A policeman is patrolling his beat at night. He comes across a man bent over in the gutter under a streetlight. Thinking him to be drunk, he asks the man what he's doing. The man responds, "I'm looking for my keys," to which the policeman responds, "You lost your keys here?" The man points to a darkened drain pipe and says, "No, I lost them over there." Quizzically, the policeman asks, "Why are you looking here then?" The man responds, "Because I can see better here." This kind of bias is systemic within archaeology. Consider the question of population distribution in the Paleolithic. It has become recently evident that until 20,000 years ago, much of the North Pole area had a subtropical climate, while Eurasia and the Americas were largely frozen wastelands. Very few people would have lived in these latter regions, whilst it's safe to say that the polar region likely hosted larger groups of humans who were far more prosperous than those inhabiting the predominant regions of modern times. It should be noted that numerous Indo-European cultures, including the Greeks and Hindus, placed the origin of their cultures in the far north, and that some cartographers as late as the early Renaissance placed the North Pole as the center of the world, a choice that likely reflected less a geographic centrality and more of a cultural and historic centrality. Similarly, we know that until about 12,000 years ago, the seas were about 120 meters lower than they are today. Thus it follows that of the people who did live in the Americas and Eurasia, most would have on coastlines which are now inaccessible to archaeologists. Similarly, we have regions like the Sahara Desert which are largely uninhabitable today, but were lush and fertile during the Paleolithic. A very clear pattern emerges in which regions that are fertile and habitable today were barren and uninhabitable in the Paleolithic and vice versa. The problem is that not only is performing excavations in areas like the Arctic incredibly expensive, difficult, and uncomfortable, the quintessential barrenness of the land yields little clues as to where the most fruitful candidates for excavation might lie. Thus, present archaeological methodology is unlikely to discover any evidence of Paleolithic civilization, even if there was any will to do so, which there is not. What we can say with confidence is that the peoples who lived in the currently habitable regions of the earth were the marginals, the primitives, and the outcasts, as is always the case with people who live in the least desirable regions. In view of this, it is very clear that the archaeologists are forming statistical estimates about Paleolithic populations from samples that suffer from extreme systematic bias. We can conclude from this that estimates of population levels from that period are definitely extreme underestimates, and that estimates of the technological level attained by people in this period are probably also similarly flawed. If there is any acknowledgement of this bias among mainstream archaeologists, then I am not aware of it. In more intellectually serious fields, this kind of oversight would be considered seriously amateurish and quite embarrassing. These kinds of oversights abound in the archaeological field. Consider the question of the earliest civilizations. The two earliest civilizations, according to archaeologists, are Sumeria and Egypt. An important confounding factor is that both civilizations are found in arid desert regions, where the remains of said civilizations are least likely to remain undisturbed by man and nature. This would be an obvious issue to someone trained in fields like physics or statistics, but apparently most archaeologists have backgrounds in the humanities where rigorous thinking takes a back seat to the absorption of clerical orthodoxy. The fact that the Sumerians clearly did not believe that their civilization was the first is apparently of no relevance. The curious nature of the Egyptian civilization and its abrupt and inexplicable emergence onto the archaeological record should cast serious doubt onto the validity of the archaeological methodology in general, but instead it is treated as a mere irrelevant curiosity. Other fields have been completely upended by lesser anomalies, but archaeologists just keep on obsessing over potsherds and bone fragments as if nothing was amiss. To take another example, for a long time archaeologists insisted that the city of Troy was a myth and never actually existed, since they could not find any ruins that might correspond to the old city. But if Troy really was one of the most important cities in the Mediterranean, then it would have almost certainly been located at a strategically and commercially optimal location. But any location that was so optimal in that period almost certainly would retain its optimality in later periods. Thus, in all likelihood, the city of Troy has been built over many times since then, and its ruins lie beneath a major modern Turkish city, though we can only guess which one it might be. These kinds of oversights abound in the archaeological field. Consider the question of the earliest civilizations. The two earliest civilizations, according to archaeologists, are Sumeria and Egypt. An important confounding factor is that both civilizations are found in arid desert regions, where the remains of said civilizations are least likely to remain undisturbed by man and nature. This would be an obvious issue to someone trained in fields like physics or statistics, but apparently most archaeologists have backgrounds in the humanities where rigorous thinking takes a back seat to the absorption of clerical orthodoxy. The fact that the Sumerians clearly did not believe that their civilization was the first is apparently of no relevance. The curious nature of the Egyptian civilization and its abrupt and inexplicable emergence onto the archaeological record should cast serious doubt onto the validity of the archaeological methodology in general, but instead it is treated as a mere irrelevant curiosity. Other fields have been completely upended by lesser anomalies, but archaeologists just keep on obsessing over potsherds and bone fragments as if nothing was amiss. To take another example, for a long time archaeologists insisted that the city of Troy was a myth and never actually existed, since they could not find any ruins that might correspond to the old city. But if Troy really was one of the most important cities in the Mediterranean, then it would have almost certainly been located at a strategically and commercially optimal location. But any location that was so optimal in that period almost certainly would retain its optimality in later periods. Thus, in all likelihood, the city of Troy has been built over many times since then, and its ruins lie beneath a major modern Turkish city, though we can only guess which one it might be. Even in more recent times, we know that certain organizations have periodic book burnings when their political power is threatened, and even mainstream scholars have come to agree that much of the written history they present to is suspect. The older a document is, the lower its chances of surviving. My guess is that this probability is given by either an exponential distribution or a power law distribution. In either case, the probability of any document surviving past a certain point goes rapidly to zero. It would not surprise me in the least if that certain point was a period of 5,000 years or so. The point is that every real scientist has to carefully quantify their uncertainty. To a large extent, this is the difference between real sciences like physics and chemistry and fake sciences like sociology. Archaeology is such a fake science that not only do they fail to quantify their uncertainty or even qualify it, they don't even pretend to do so like other fake sciences. It doesn't even seem to occur to them that this is something that needs to be done. Or maybe they don't, because they realized that doing so would reveal serious shortcomings in their method and orthodoxy that would completely obliterate the prestige of their field. Shortcomings of the field aside, a little bit of deductive reasoning I'd more than enough to suggest that it's very likely that human civilization stretches back far beyond the Pleistocene.
A survey carried out in the United States speculates on the possibility that a civilization before the human one existed on planet Earth. According to the study jointly signed by Adam Frank, a physicist at the University of Rochester, and Gavin Schmidt, a NASA scientist, the hypothesis is theoretically plausible. The study started from an intriguing question: if an advanced civilization had existed in an extremely remote past, would there be any remnants of it after its end? While we have evidence of past civilizations in the form of statues, buildings, and fossils dating back a few thousand years, the picture gets murkier when looking for events that took place hundreds of millions of years ago. Researchers claim that if an ancient civilization had lasted 100,000 years, but disappeared 60 million years ago, it would be almost impossible to find any remnants of it today. Fossilized remains of living beings or eventual remaining ruins would hardly resist for so long. It's also good to remember that this chronological period may seem very long to humans, but to Earth's history it's just the blink of an eye. After maybe 200,000 years there would not be much left. This could have happened.
Development of civilization doesn't follow pre-configured line. There may be developed societies without any access to modern technologies, but with great knowledge of pharmaceutics and wildlife, for example, although such civilization will be much more anarchic and decentralized in nature.
Most ancient technology disappeared because the knowledge was limited, either controlled by elites or owned by the discoverer who didn't divulge it to anyone, causing the knowledge to die with them. For instance, even though clear glass is now super commonplace, in ancient Rome it was actually like the bee's knees when it first was introduced, and was a status symbol above the common blue glass. However, after the first discoverer of the refining process that allowed clear glass died, the knowledge was lost for a while until someone else discovered it. In this case, since it was an elite item, it was also most likely limited not only by the creator so he could make money, but by elite control. Also, various cultures either didn't keep records, or they didn't keep records that were preserved. Most of what we know about ancient technologies is by looking at the artifact and either trying to replicate it in creation, in useware, etc., or just working backwards with educated guesses. And it's possible that some of the artifacts simply didn't preserve, so our knowledge of their production and use is limited.
This is the end of the Age of Iron. During this age, humans live an existence of toil and misery. Children dishonor their parents, brother fights with brother, and the social contract between guest and host, Xenia, is forgotten. During this age, might makes right, and bad men use lies to be thought good. At the height of this age, humans no longer feel shame or indignation at wrongdoing. Babies will be born with gray hair, and the gods will have completely forsaken humanity. There will be no help against evil. Hesiod, The Ages of Man, 800 BC. There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. Whereas just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and the other requisites of civilized life, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like a pestilence, comes pouring down and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And so you have to begin all over again like children and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. Plato, Timaeus, 360 BC. All civilization will be wiped out. A few survivors will exist in the mountains and desert regions. Humanity will dwindle to the tens of thousands. All will be forgotten, and a new age will be born. New languages, new technologies, new races of man. Ancient cities will be uncovered 10,000 years from now, and our ways will be unknown.
Okay, I recently fell down a research hole on the most recent information on ancient human civilizations. There's proof of human civilizations dating back to at least 11,000 years ago that was industrious enough to build massive stone structures with stones that even today It would prove to be a hazardous job to move on the ground, let alone stack them. We regularly find incredible technologies that we can't even fathom to credit to cultures that came so much earlier than us. I know a lot of people credit aliens to this stuff, but imagine for a second that humans did do that. There's been so many conquests and burnings of historical material that there is almost no way for us to find out how these civilizations had recorded their own feats. Who knows what's been destroyed? Consider, in the last 2,000 years, there have been hundreds of regimes that led determined efforts to destroy the religious texts of an opposing faction, and in ham-fisted warfare has destroyed centuries of documents, relics, architecture, and knowledge. Even attempting to claim that these peoples didn't have some technologies that we simply cannot understand is absurd to me. The scientific community has become obsessed with trying to set itself separate from ancient writings, because the idea of confirming information that someone recorded centuries before has become an affront to the modern man. Who knows if ancient man had flying machines, or if they knew about powers that we've completely lost due to the blackmailing and the complete erasing of their culture and history. This hit me when I was in the middle of all this. We're the next civilization to disappear. It completely doesn't matter what it is: nuclear war, asteroid strike, volcanic eruption. Something is going to come along and kill civilization, and with it, the internet. There will be an event that will wipe out the biggest collection of information our species has ever accumulated. Along with it goes our history, our culture, and everything anyone will ever know of, as far as we know, the most sophisticated era of our species. After that, we're cavemen, or at least frontiersmen. Eventually, the survivors will tell their progeny about the relics of their time, how we had everything at our fingertips. And eventually, there's going to be a time that people will say, well, I've never seen it. And just like that, we disappear. We become the myth people that are debated on about existing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.